it's the city is very familiar with the Russia, as I understand, visit probably more than 700 cities by now. Yeah, he's a very prolific researcher and so definitely well respected. So he's with UT Dallas for 28 years, 29 years, and because of him, the program, raised to what, number 2 in the nation from somewhere. I read your article, say 61 for 2-3 decades. He basically rebuilt that department. And yeah, so he's a university chair professor and the director of the Center for Intelligent Supply Network. He has authored 11 books and more than 400 research papers. He initiated a doctoral program in the UT Dallas and University of Toronto, and supervised numerous doctor, PhD students and postdoc students. Okay, he is the board member of POMS and Shang Journal of Control and Optimization. He has many fellows title, in the many prestigious society, including POMS and Informs, and he was the president of POMS and Alumni Award from Carnegie Mellon. So, he is here because he's joined the CMU 75 years anniversary for the celebration of paper school. So we are lucky to have you here. He also was the president of the POMS and Alumni Award receiver of CMU, and he has been honored in many conferences with also his book and the establishment of the POMS. If you look at the POMS, there is a /Stacy Award. So you can see that he is well established, or more than like a guru of OM. So if any of us can be about 20% as good as he, we're already pretty successful. Yeah. So it's our honor to welcome you. Thank you for coming and appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen. It is always good to come back to Pittsburgh. It was a long time ago before I graduated. I finished my PhD in 1971. And so I can give you a first line of my speech tomorrow, which is going to be the 75th anniversary of Katz School, which was called GSIA at that time. I think my first line will be that I'm 5 years older than the school. That would be my first line. Anyway, just to correct that, I did give you that article. It turns out that the OM group, the article is about the OM group, right? This just got published in PALM. And we were part of the OM group, according to the UT Dallas ranking system based on 24 journals. We were nowhere, like we were not even part of 100. So we were like 150 or something. So it's not even in my
61
below.
So what is
we are number 1 in terms of UT Dallas ranking list, the OM department, if you choose the 5 journals in OM. But because we are number 1 and we are so far above the other universities that are 2nd and 3rd, that we actually brought the business school as number 2. So business school is number 2 mostly because of the OM.
I see.
So I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. Number 1 in OM.
Number 1 in OM based on 5 journals, because you can
worldwide, not just US.
Worldwide. Yeah, but worldwide US is more or less the same. Then you will get in Seattle and the business school will say that. Okay. So the reason I chose this talk is because I want to give you some of the aspect of Stackelberg-Nash, which are used in supply chain coordination as well, in the setting of dynamic and stochastic. And those were not known to our community, and that's still really not known to our community in a big way. So I just want to bring you to those ideas here. And then if I have a time, I will have an application to an OM problem that was published actually in 2015. But my main focus would be to bring certain things that you might not know. And if you know, that's great. I would like to have, if there are, I understand that you are not going to hire any PhD students starting this year, right? This is potassium is going to be frozen. So where are these are the PhD students? Are there any PhD students here?
We have PhD students and some visiting scholars.
Okay. But because we are continuing to hire PhD students, one of the first thing when I went to PhD in 1997 is there was no OM PhD program. So I basically started the PhD program, and we did not have very good students for the first. Well, some of them actually came, and then we had to get them to leave and give them a master's degree or something. And then we started getting some good students. And now, starting now, at least, as far as I know, my last conversation with our dean, our OM department can have 5 PhD students every year. And so we have maybe about 25 students in session at any given time in OM department. But then there are other areas. So our school is highly PhD oriented school, and there are probably about 100 students in our program in different areas. We even call it it's a matchmaking institution. There are a lot of people who find their wives there. Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 ideas here. One is hierarchical, which means that there's a leader-follower game. And we all know leader-follower game in a single period setting. And my purpose here is to extend that to multi-period setting. And the other one, I'm going to give you an idea we call mixed leadership game, in which there are many decisions that a supply chain makes. But it's possible that leader is a leader on one decision, but follower on another decision. So you can be a leader and a follower. And I wrote the first paper on that area, and I call them a mixed leadership game. So I will say a little bit more about that as well. Okay. So let's go. I want to start with a very simple thing here, because this talk was also given one time to a general community where I was making a talk in which I made myself a talk in which there is no math equation. One of my close friends said that must have been very difficult for you. But so that was the way I taught. But now I put some slides because I changed the talk a little bit so that gives some slides. But part of it is still without kind of any equation. Okay. So this is our supply chain. The supplier sets the wholesale price to maximize his profit, and the retailer then responds to that and decides on the order quantity. This is a famous news vendor kind of situation here. And usually we know that their self-fulfilling actions do not maximize the supply chain. Okay, and that particular idea in our field is called double marginalization. And the reason they are called double marginalization is because there are 2 margins involved here. Supplier puts a margin over its cost to set the wholesale price, and the retailer then earns a margin that equals to the difference between the retail price and the wholesale price. So there are 2 margins that we call double marginalization. And this problem is generally modeled as a Stackelberg game. Okay, so we all know many papers on this particular setting. So then I do want to mention that there is a lot of relationship between Stackelberg and Nash. And not everybody knows about these things. And so I want to go through, and also Nash equilibrium put forward by John Nash. Actually, the dynamic setting of Nash equilibrium is well known. So it came much earlier, and people knew how to generalize the Nash equilibrium to dynamic setting. But the Stackelberg setting largely was ignored by our community anyway, but it was available in the optimal control community. So I I want to choose an example and I give you, so quickly, basically, in the game of two or more players, a set of decision by the players in Nash equilibrium, if no player can do better by changing his decision while the others stay with their decision. You can also do the other way, if a player can do better by changing his decision, knowing that the decision of the others are set in stone, then the set of decision is not a Nash. So you can do either their equivalent. And so I'm just going to start with an example, which is a well-known movie, Beautiful Mind. And I think
Incoming, gentlemen.
Aye, aye, aye. Deep breaths. Nash, you might want to stop shuffling your papers for 5 seconds.
I will not buy you gentlemen beer.
Oh, we're not here for beer, my friend.
Oh. Does anyone else feel she should be moving in slow motion?
Will she want a large wedding, you think?
Should we say swords, gentlemen? Pistols at dawn?
Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics.
In competition, individual ambition serves the common good.
Exactly.
Every man for himself, gentlemen.
And those who strike out are stuck with their friends.
I'm not gonna strike out.
You can lead a blonde to water, but you can't make her drink.
I don't think you said that.
All right, nobody move. She's looking over here. Right, she's looking at Nash.
Oh, God. All right, he may have the upper hand now, but wait until he opens his mouth. Remember the last time?
Oh, yes, that was most of the history books.
Adam Smith needs revision.
What are you talking about?
If we all go for the blonde, we block each other. Not a single one of us is going to get her. So then we go for her friends. But they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice. But what if no one goes for the blonde? We don't get in each other's way, and we don't insult the other girls. That's the only way we win. That's the only way we all get laid. Adam Smith said, the best result comes from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself, right? That's what he said, that's right? Incomplete. Incomplete. Okay? Because the best result would come from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself and the group.
Ash, this is some way for you to get the blonde on your own. You can go to hell.
Governing dynamics, gentlemen. Governing dynamics. Adam Smith. What's wrong?
Yep, here we go. Careful, careful.
Thank you.
okay. If there are Chinese subtitles, because one of my Chinese co-authors put the Chinese subtitles in there, given that it's presented to me. So in the movie, the Nash thanks the blonde woman for his epiphany and goes on to write his masterpiece called Non-Cooperative Games, which is the 20-page thesis, where he put forward the concept of Nash equilibrium. Four friends, I suppose, act on Nash equilibrium, they all choose the brunettes. And the question, of course, is do this for Nash equilibrium. And it is known that it is not, because everybody can gain by going for one woman, while the other stay with their woman. So my second definition, this is not natural. Even though it's a movie about natural, that one is not a natural. I'm just using this example because I'm gonna take a simplified version of that example and give you the Nash and the Stackelberg of that example. Excuse me. So we have now two men, Tom and Dick, and we have two girls, Emily and Linda. And so instead of four, I have only two. And Tom and Dick, Emily and Linda, both men prefer Emily to Linda, and no one gets in any if they choose They're both choosing the same. And when I was writing this, I was actually doing blonde and brunette, and my daughter said, "Dad, that is not politically correct." So the brunette and blonde became Emily and Linda, the other way around. And so that it is. Now it is clear there that there are two Nash equilibria here. In one, you have a Tom chooses Emily, Dick chooses Linda. And in the other one, Tom chooses Linda, Dick chooses Emily. And you can see either definition works. In one, if Tom deviates by going for Linda, he suffers by getting none. Likewise, if Dick deviates by going for Emily, he suffers the same thing. A similar argument goes for the second equilibrium. So you can see that you check the equilibrium by deviation. So one person deviates, others stay with the decision. And the idea is, what is this deviation? You can see the deviation is an important aspect here. And that's going to make a distinction between Stackelberg and Nash. So now we're going to do same game. And we're going to start on the Stackelberg. Just a little bit of history here. A Stackelberg game was put forward by Stackelberg in actually 1934. If you notice, the famous book that we all know, for Neumann Morgenstern book, The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, was actually in 1944. And he put forward the idea of zero-sum games. The Nash games were not there yet, but that is the Nash's contribution. But you can see that we usually don't. Stackelberg game was actually before this book, 1944, famous book that was put forward. But von Neumann had a book in Germany in 1928. It's called The Theory of Parallel Games, which is also zero-sum games. So the game theory, in some sense, is von Neumann is the big name there, and the Stackelberg came in fact later. So I'm going to now make this game a Stackelberg game. So we leave Tom as a leader now and Dick as a follower. So that is one change. We now don't have a simultaneous game, we have a sequential game. So Tom is going to decide first and Dick is going to follow. The sequential game, we all know, is solved by backward induction. Okay, so we do the back. We first obtain the best response function for every action that Tom takes. So we need to find the response function, and then Tom takes the best response function in making his decision. Okay? So that's how you solve the Stackelberg game. First find the best response function, then take the best function into account and decide. So let's now look at this. I don't want any equations here, so right now it's still a function is going to be like a table. So I have 4 possible response functions. These are purple, yellow, blue, and gray. The purple one is Tom's, this is Emily, Dick's response is Linda. This is a function, by the way. So it's a function of Emily is Linda, function of Linda is Emily. Another function is function of Emily is Emily, function of Linda is Emily. So these are four functions here, which I call them purple, yellow, blue, and gray. And given the best response function, which is purple, it's clear that the Tom's best action is to choose Emily. And from Dick's purple response, he gets Linda. So the Stackelberg equilibrium has a 1 equilibrium now. Tom is choosing Emily, Dick chooses Linda. Obviously, we know that Nash equilibrium has 2 equilibria. Stackelberg has only 1 in this case, which means the leader does get the first mover advantage, which they don't get in the simultaneous step. Okay? So there is that part, which is certainly known. Now, here's the thing. If Tom deviates, he loses given the best response function of Dick and purple. So you can see that what is staying fixed is the response function of Dick. Look at the other way. If Dick changes his response to yellow, blue, or gray, that means from purple goes to yellow, blue, or gray, given that Tom has already chosen Emily, Dick loses or stays the same. So you can see that checking Stackelberg equilibrium requires us a different deviation. The deviation is not from one girl to another. Deviation is one response function to another response. That is a fundamental difference between the two equilibria in the sense of how do you check the equilibrium depends on what is the space of deviation. So the obvious difference is, of course, simultaneous and sequential. It's also clear that the Tom has a first mover advantage in Stackelberg. And the subtle difference is that the Dick's deviation for checking the Nash equilibrium is to change his action, going from the woman in the equilibrium to another, whereas his deviation for checking the Stackelberg equilibrium is to change his response function, going from purple to another. So that's how you check the two equilibrium. And that will allow us to give a definition of a Stackelberg equilibrium in a dynamic setting as well. And that's one of the purposes of this talk. Any questions so far? Okay. There is a less well-known difference when it comes to dynamic games, and I'll tell you that in slide 24. In fact, when I gave the talk first time in Russia, one of the Russian guys said, "Oh, but you didn't talk about that." So the slide 24 is that. I know it, but I didn't put it there. Okay, so we'll talk about that later. So now we are going to go from single period, which is very well known in our field. There are like hundreds of supply chain coordination papers. All of them are single. And I tried to do a two-period game. And my original idea was that people, of course, tried two-period games, but they probably gave up because our journals require closed form solutions. They don't care if you do some numerical stuff and show something. And maybe there was no closed form solution available, like in the single period, so people gave up. But more and more, when I start thinking about it, I realized that it was not the case. The case is that they did not know what the second two-period equilibrium is. So you need a definition first. And if you have the definition, once you have a definition, even if you don't have a closed form solution, you can still do something. But without the definition, you're nowhere. And that's my feeling. I cannot tell you anything more. So now let's go into two-period supply chain. What I'm doing now also goes for multi-period, but the talk is two-period because it's easier to explain things and see what's going on. So basically, just like when you make a graph, 1 to 2 dimension is easy. You make a graph. But once you go from 2 to 3, the graphs becomes very different. And 3 to 4 is impossible. So same thing here, when you go from 1 period to 2 period, there's a huge conceptual jump. But when you go from 2 to 3, there is no such conceptual jump. All that happens is becoming mathematically more complex. The concept jump happens from 1 to 2, 2 to 3 to 3 to 4. There is no conceptual jump. Just make it more difficult to analyze, and formula become messy and all of that. But there is so 1 to 2 is basically all the richness that I'm talking about happens in 1. So now let's see what happens when you go from 1 to 2. Remember, the world is so something happens at the end of period 1 that people have to usually take a note of and make a decision in second period. But there is something called an open loop control. The open loop control or open loop solution is something like this. Let's take our example of supply chain. So how does the open loop works? The open loop works, the supplier will announce the wholesale price in period 1 and 2 at the beginning of the game. So that would be W1 and W2. He said, these are my prices. So what would be the reaction function? The reaction function of the retailer will be ordering quantity in period 1 and period 2. Now notice the ordering quantity in period Q1 would be a function of W1, W2. Because I know both prices. And I know if the W2 is too expensive, I may order more. So I will take into account. So the function or the response function Q1 will be actually a function of W1, W2. So that's what happens in open loop games. And the leader will continue to have the first mover advantage because open loop game mathematically is a single period problem. Everything gets decided at time 0. Difference between that is that you can formulate that as a math programming problem. So W1, W2 is just a vector. Instead of W in a single period setting, W1, W2 is a vector. In a math programming problem, there is no time. There's only a decision variable is x, which is the vector. But x1, x2, x3 doesn't require you to have any time aspect to it. It's not no requirement in math programming that x2 comes after x1. Okay. So basically, open loop game mathematically is a single period game. Everything that we know about single period will go through. First four advantage will go through. Okay, all of this. Drawback is serious. The drawback is that the decisions are already done, and now I observe the demand, which is realized at the end of period one. And the end of period one, when I observe the demand, it will affect my inventory. And if I affect my inventory, it will affect my second period decision. But I already made the second period decision. But then I may renege. I say, okay, guy, I'm sorry. I told you W2, but I'm going to change my mind. Like that's what happened. So the question then is, it is not time consistent, which is to say that if I resolve the problem at the end of period one, I will not get the same W2, Q2 decisions anymore. Whatever I decided at time one may not be the solution if I solve the problem in period. Because period two is a single period problem. And I have all the data once I observe something. Okay. So that means the supplier has an incentive, because it's not time consistent, the supplier has an incentive in period two to renege on the wholesale price announced in period two and period three. So we publish a lot of papers in open loop games, partly because they are easy to publish, not publish, but easy to solve in many cases. And we will give all sorts of justification to justify why we do that. One justification is commitment. The two guys are committed to their prices. And then the question is, who's going to force the commitment? The only way we force the commitment in our society is going through a court. Right? But what if the reneging gives me $1 million and the maximum fine the court can pay is only $500,000? Then I will renege. As a rational guy, I will renege. So the only way you can do a full commitment, or maybe a full commitment, to just speak glibly, is to have a death sentence. If you change from W2 even by 1 penny, your sentence, then chances are that people will not change. But that's not going to, that's not possible. I mean, slavery is against the law right now. So you cannot just do this, right? But on the other hand, if you put a finite value on the court's decision, who has modeled that? I don't see any model in our literature that brings in an amount of money that the court will charge you, then that decision will change, right? It will have a new, it's a new problem. But nobody's done it. Nobody does it because it's difficult. And I go one step further. The whole idea of mechanism design, when we have a revolution principle that says all contracts are truthful because you don't need to consider any other, that's only true for single period games. And it's only true also for multi-period games as long as the multi-period game is open loop. But if you go beyond that, we don't have a revolution principle. So again, all the papers in mechanism design, almost all of them, are either single periods or open loop. You don't see anything other than that because we don't know how to solve them. And because we, but the life is not like that. I mean, to give you the example, there was a treaty between the Russians and the West. The treaty was there, but Russia put into Crimea. It was not part of the treaty. So people do renege on their decisions, even though they made a commitment. So that happens all the time in real life. So anyway, so what is the second thing? So what do? because it is not a good idea to have a decision in which whatever happens at the end of period one, that you don't have any realization of that. You must realize what happens. That's the reality. So this is done in this solution. Okay. So here there's something called feedback, which is supplier announces only the first period wholesale price at the beginning of period one. But then a solution in period one somehow takes into advantage of what will happen. Think dynamic programming, right? You do backward induction, right? That's what you do, but not in a game theory setting. We know how to do dynamic programming in a single period setting, and everything is time consistent. Because you solve the from backwards, everything is time consistent. But in two-period setting, in a game setting, is not clear what we do. In period two, the supplier announces the second period wholesale price after observing the demand and consequently the inventory. Because your inventory depends on demand. You ordered something and then demand happened, and what you had minus what you sold is what you have left with, and that's your inventory in a second. And if your inventory is low, I want to order more. If your inventory is high, I don't want to order anything, right? That's kind of an idea. So the retailer responds to supplier's wholesale price period-wise. Both take into account the state observed in the second period. That means the beginning of the first period, at the end of the first period. The solution is time consistent. The drawback now is, and it's not really a drawback, that I will show you why it's not a drawback, but right now the drawback is that leader only has a period-wise first mover advantage. All we can see at this point. Period-wise, but there may not be a global first mover advantage on part of the leader. But we will see that that issue is not going to be interesting, or it's not going to be affecting us because we're going to coordinate it. Once you coordinate it, then there is no reason to worry about the first mover advantage. So, are there any questions in this simple part between the Nash and Stackelberg and open loop? By the way, there are many other concepts of equilibriums. I'm only giving you two. There are many others which are, the decision depends on the whole past, not just on the current state, like in dynamic programming. What if it depends on the entire past history? So there are called closed loop equilibria. They're more complicated, and usually we don't. So I have a paper in Siam control where I go through several different equilibria. It depends on the information structure. And then maybe different information structure, you write to different equilibria, and that paper is cited later on in this talk. You will see the end references of this talk. So I'm going to bring you a first problem that I did in two-period setting and coordinated it. I had two requirements. The problem has to be two-period, and the problem has to be stochastic. And I did not go to the news vendor. Look, I thought everybody had looked at the news vendor and they did not know how to solve it. So I had to concoct another problem, which is more simple to solve. Because the idea for me is not to find a realistic problem of any kind. The idea for me is to find a mathematical problem that has these features, and I can show you that I can. That was the whole idea. So that paper, 2015. But in the process, I also wanted to educate the community. So if you saw my paper in 2015, you will see a whole section on what is the dynamic Stackelberg game, and that's a multi-period. And I use it for two periods. So I do a whole section on basically teaching the community of this idea that it's not there. So that's where the equations will come in, okay? So that was the equation we put in afterwards in this time. Okay, so we are going to have a following thing. We're going to learn about our production system. So when I produce more, then I can reduce the cost of production in the second period. Because I learn. The learning by doing is well-known concept in our literature. So we were going to say that we learn, and then what we produce in the first period will affect the cost in the second period. And the cost in the second period is going to be random. Even though we learn, but there may still be a random component. So that's going to be our state variable, not inventory. Our state variable would be cost of production, not inventory. Okay. So that part is, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I want to get other things. There's a whole literature on learning by doing. In the OM, the first paper about the cost learning is done by Wright in 1936, and it showed that direct labor cost of manufacturing an airframe fell by 20% with every doubling of fuel yard. When I put the picture of the airplane, everyone thinks these are Wright brothers, but they are not Wright brothers. These are different Wright, okay? Different Wright who wrote this paper in 1936. But he worked on the airframe manufacturing. There is a lot of reasons why the learning curve happens. Labor efficiency, better use of equipment. I'm not an expert on it, but economics people have lots and lots of literature on learning by doing. Kenneth Arrow even have a whole paper on learning by doing. He was one of the great economists of our time. I happen to be a co-author of Kenneth Arrow, so I do want to say something. He did have a paper on learning by doing. Okay. So we're going to want learning to be dynamic and stochastic. And the cost falls with cumulative production over time. And empirically, the rate at which the observed cost declines tend to vary widely, both across industries and even across departments. So, particularly true for production of new products, there will be considerable uncertainty in terms of the rate at which, like semiconductor manufacturing was when it was new. People were learning a lot about how to produce, and the cost declined rapidly in producing semiconductor chips. So I'm going to have a problem. So I'm going to go all the way up to here, and we're going to have a centralized system, a two-period problem, centralized. So monopolist manufacturer. Learning curve creates interdependency between production and cumulative quantity, production quantity. We're going to assume a price-dependent demand, but we're not going to assume demand to be stochastic. But we're going to assume it to be price-dependent, which is not in the news right now, unless you go back to producing the other extension of news render where they include price. So price-dependent demand. Then optimal production quantity, you can overproduce initially. It's possible because if you want to it's a centralized system. If I overproduce initially, even though it's more than demand, I can carry the inventory. If the cost of inventory is not that high, then overproduction will reduce my cost of production in the second. So it is a case can be made to produce more than what you would otherwise do. So the reduced price to increase demand, and that's the whole idea. Because in the news vendor supply chain problem, we know that the retailer charges higher price than what is optimal for the supply chain. That's called the double marginalization. So here I want to reduce the price. So because he's a centralized guy, he can reduce the price, and that would increase the demand in the first period. So he will produce more in the first period, and then you will have a second period cost lower. So you could think that could be a possible solution depending on the parameter. Okay. Now let's look at the decentralized setting. So decentralized setting, the retailer has the pricing power and makes the ordering decision. The manufacturer has a power of deciding wholesale price and how much. So there are 4 decisions here. And you can see double marginalization, high price and suboptimal production. So learning curve effect may not even be fully realized. So if you take the old supply chain idea of double marginalization where the retailer charge high price, you can see if you charge high price, you are not going to, first of all, there's already a double marginalization, and there'll be another one because the cost reduction is not being taken into account. So these guys decide wholesale price and production quantity, they decide retail price and ordering quantity, and the learning experience will give you. So now I'm going to, in the paper, there are two sections. One is called no inventory option, one is called manufactured carry inventory from first period to second period. The second section only makes slightly more difficult math, but it is not. So there's no new idea there. That will not happen in the first option, and the first one is much simpler. So I'm only going to cover the first one here. We'll leave that later. So here's the model. First period, the infant stage, and where you learn, and the second period, the mature stage of the industry. And there are lots and lots of papers, including some Nobel laureates like Pittsburgh and Tirol, and even Dasgupta and Stiglitz. And there's a Portuguese or Brazilian, I don't know where this is. There's another paper also of this kind. So there are papers that give you this. So I'm going to have a market. So I'm going to make a demand which is going to be linear in price. So AI is the market potential, P is the price sensitivity, PI is the retail price in period I, WI is the wholesale price in period I being 1 and 2 here. So we're going to only 2 periods. And the cost learning will happen like this. We will observe the cost C1. We know the C1 in the first period. And then whatever production happens, there will be a cost in the second period, which at the time of the first period will be random. C2, the capital C2. But at the end of the first period, we'll realize it. And that will be small C2. And everybody will observe the small C2 before they make the decision. And the lambda is going to be a learning rate. So that's going to be a random variable in our model. Okay, lambda can go from 0 to 1. And so we will talk a little bit more there. I mean, if 0 means there's no learning taking place, 1 means full learning taking place, all of that. And the QI is the retailer's order quantity, small QI, the big QI is the production, manufacturer production quantity. We can sort of show that if the manufacturer doesn't carry any inventory, then big QI and small QI will be the same. So one of the decisions will be. And II will be the inventory at the beginning of period I and in the second period, but that will happen only, that will be relevant for this section, which I'm not going to cover. So as I kind of suppress the II here because it's not going to be part of this stuff. This is important. Sometimes don't like one by one. It's just, the whole thing is good here. So we begin with cost of production C1. That's our state variable. That's going to evolve. Okay? And everybody knows this. And knowing this, manufacturer will decide W1 and Q1. And then this guy will react. So P1 and Q1 will be function of W1 and Q1. That's period 1. At the end of period 1, learning takes place. And learning takes place, C2 is realized as small C2, and everybody observes small C2. And based on a C2, these guys will decide on W2 and Q2. Then these will react to these guys, and again, then finishes. So this is kind of the idea of a feedback Stackelberg, because we are now reacting on to the state. So we have, that's called feedback. Okay? We're reacting on the state. Hey, anything here? Because the next notation will come, which is just the notation. The definition of a dynamic Stackelberg game doesn't require, I mean, there are proofs and stuff available, but I'm not going to do all of that. I'm just going to give you the definition, and definition only in this notation. The notation is somewhat important to have a clear notation to see what is the clear definition. So in our model then, demand is deterministic. DI is AI minus B times PI. B can also be a function of I, but I don't make it, it's just to make it simple. C2 is the state equation, which is C2 is C1 minus lambda times Q1. Lambda is the learning rate between 0 and gamma. And so if the gamma is very high learning rate, so the C2 will be C1 minus small gamma Q1. If learning rate is 0, it will be no learning, and in between some learning. Okay, so learning depends on this lambda. Lambda will be realized at the end of period. Mean learning rate is mu, and standard deviation is sigma. It turns out that in our problem, we don't need the distribution of lambda. We only need mu and sigma because we will see in our model only mu and sigma appear. But in general, you will need the whole distribution. In general, but in this one, we don't. But that's a statistics question, not important here. Okay, we're going to have a no option, no inventory carrying. Back orders are not allowed. So the sales that are not the sales would be lost if we don't produce. And we have a forward looking, which means they look to the future in some way. They don't make a decision in period one without knowing what happens in period two. These assumptions are innocuous only to when you do the first order condition, sometimes you don't have the boundaries. When you have boundaries, you have to say mean A comma B. It just makes life more difficult. So they are not very germane to our discussion. So I just make the assumption to make the notation simple. So centralized problem is easy. It's just a dynamic programming. It's a single agent, 2 period, no issue there. And the problem is like this: the second period you have the P2 minus. You can only sell the minimum of those two because the sales are lost. And so that one, and you have a C2 minus Q2, which is C2Q2, which is the cost of production, but C2 is a random variable. And so you can maximize that. Period one, you have a small C1, so that's okay. P1 is the price. Expected value because C2 is a random variable, and outside we maximize P1. Okay, so this is the dynamic programming. You can solve it backward. Everything is very easy to solve. So now we can see. So P1 star, which is the price, optimal price for the centralized solution. That one, P2 star, the second page. That one is going to be a function of C2 because everybody observes C2. And Q1 star is going to be that, C2 star, which is going to be C1 minus that, which is the random variable, and lambda. And finally, the profit of the supply chain, of course, depends on C1 because that's the only thing that's given. It's not a function of C1. I just write it in case C1, if you want to make the problem more complicated, but C1 is also a random variable, you can do that. Oh. So that's centralized problem. So now we're going to do decentralized problem. Okay. So the plan now is to do a decentralized problem, do a Stackelberg equilibrium, then go to a contract and coordinate that supply chain. And in between the double marginalization. If there's no double marginalization, no need to coordinate, right? But there will be double marginalization. So now I'm going to go to say the following. Phi m is the profit. This depends on everything. Okay. And so that's going to be in our problem W1 Q1, which is the wholesale price that is going to be charged. And so the manufacturer gets that much revenue. Manufacturer's cost is that W2 Q2, the expected value. So you have all of that. Retailer, on the other hand, an objective function where you have a D1 and a Q1 here, small, not big Q1, but small Q. So this is easy. You can see the profit of these two guys, manufacturer and retailer, and they are subject to a state equation called C2 C1 minus. Now you see in period I, the manufacturer is WIQI and the retailers are PIQI. Production cost CI in the state variable in the system. And so that is our decentralized profit and a state equation. Now we want to go and see what is a Stackelberg equilibrium. And for that I need notation. So we want to go through very carefully what the notation is. I have a new secretary. Well, I had a new secretary who doesn't, old ones used to do LaTeX, but she didn't. So she couldn't change the parentheses the way I wanted it. So I asked her to at least put some color in there. So we will see which is the opening and which is the closing parentheses. But let's go to feedback second. Later, and I'm going to do this for N period. Just I told you this is a teaching part of the paper. Leader determines her strategy in a feedback form. So the state of the system is X. everybody observes X at time T. So at time T, the leader's decision would be U of X comma T. This is now optimum right now. Okay, this is just any decision. Then the leader's decision, there is a reaction by the other guy, which is the follower. The follower decision is V. He also observes X and a T, but he also observes U of X over T. As soon as that decision is given, which could be ordering quantity, that ordering quantity will show up here. So that the decision V would be a function of X, T, and this ordering. T from 1 to N. So notationally, I want a notation now. So notationally, I will decide a small u here. It will be a vector of ux1, which is the decision of this guy in period 1. You can call it x1 if you want, but x is what you observe in period 1. And then ux2, ux. This will be the decision in each period, given that x is observed in each period. You could make it x1, x2, xn. Let's see. Now the followers V is going to be a vector again, n vector, decision in each period. And now I'm going to say let this u and this u denote the spaces of u and v. Any constraint that you have, you cannot make a price more than this, price has to be at least bigger than 0. All of this can be incorporated in defining this u and v, whatever they are. Okay. And then we have to define, given any u in u, which is feasible, and any v in v, which is feasible, I have to define how the state evolves. So, since we are doing kind of a dynamic programming here, because it's time consistent, the way you do dynamic programming is not trans-0. You do it for any time t. Because whatever t is will be okay for 0 and for so okay any t. So we're going to do any time t. So let's take any time t, and let's take the state at time t that we observe to be y. So our beginning condition is t comma y. Okay. So x t y is the state in period I, given u and v, the decision of these guys, I from t plus 1 and so we are starting at t. We already decided the u and v are the decisions, which are the vectors from these guys, two guys, and then we decide to evolve the system from period t on. Okay, so that system is this: xi plus 1 is xi, which is what we have, and what the decisions are. Okay, so it'll be f of xi, ui. Some people you can put xi in there as well. It's possible. It doesn't really matter. And then you have a decision of xi, ui, vi, lambda I, which is the random variable, and the period I. That's the most general state equation you can have. Okay, so we have a state equation. It is the equation, of course, where xi. It's the equation. Okay, let me get back. It's not most general in the sense that it depends on the time past. It only depends on current, which is what we do in dynamic program. If it depends on 2, then we can redefine the variable and make it back the same way. So that's possible. But that is the state equation. And xt equal to y. Remember, I have a beginning condition ty. So that xty would be a solution to the beginning. Once I have that solution, I can define the objective function. So let's do that. So the objective function of leader, L is leader, F is follower, is going to be a function of this. So let me just spell it out one by one. It's going to be a function which will be a sum of the profits from period t to n. That's first thing. Now we have to define the profit in each period I. Okay. So what is the profit in each period I? First of all, it will be a function of x at that time I. So at the xt y, I u v is coming out of the solution of this equation. So we put it there. And of course, the U is depending on X. So when U observes the X, it will make a decision. So U will observe X. That X is this guy, this whole guy, and I, because this is I here. And then this parenthesis closing here. So that is our U. So we got an X and we got a U. Now we got a V. V is a form of XT, UXT. So V will be X, then T is I, and then U, and the U again is this guy's index. Okay, so that's our I period, and then there is a salvage value at the end. It's a finite random problem. We are not going to do infinite right now, but we can easily generalize. So we have an expected value because of the lambda, and we have that is the profit of the guy at time t. If you want a discounted value, you can easily do it because there is an I there. So you can make e to the minus it or whatever. So you can put that in there easily. So that's no problem. So we now have two profits, leader and the follower. Okay, and we just mark, we have these decision spaces for the guys. Given that it is the definition. A pair of strategy U star in U and B star in B, which is feasible, is a feedback Stackelberg if the following holds. Now let's go slowly here. So this is our leader's objective function. And we are now saying, notice here, this is U star and this is U. U is any other decision the leader will make. And our definition is if you make any other decision, you're going to lose. So if you make any other decision, notice the V star guy will react to that decision. Because that's what he's reacting to that. But if I make a change my decision, he's going to react to that. And I'm now saying for all U in this big U, and for all beginning Y and all beginning T, if I change U star to U, I will lose. Just like Nash. The only change is I have this guy. If this guy was the growth, it will become a Nash. If this guy is the response function, it becomes Stackelberg. So the definitions are the same. All you need to do is to change the space of the decision. That's that. And now we do the follower. So follower is, this is slide 24. So you have another thing coming in. Look at the follower. The follower is U star, V star. What is going to change? V star is the response function. So now the follower is going to change the response function from V star to V. So you see he goes from V star to V, but other guy stays with his decision U star. So V is dot U star for all V in V, all Y, all T. Follower will lose if he changes his decision from the equilibrium decision. Okay, that is the definition of Stackelberg equilibrium. B become Nash if you want to change the U and V space. What am I not saying, which is not known, is the following. Stackelberg, when he wrote his book, only had a single period problem. In the single period problem, he also showed that this is true for any U and any V. Even the U guy can change. In single period, that works. So it is not an equilibrium, it's stronger than equilibrium. Stronger than Nash kind of idea. It turns out that that idea of Stackelberg in the single period does not generalize. I cannot do this U star to U on both sides and say for all U and all V. I cannot do it. Doesn't work. Open loop, it works. Feedback it doesn't. So that idea is a subtle idea that you cannot generalize the Stackelberg as it was defined by Stackelberg. We have to compromise. We cannot do what he insisted. But Nash did not want it. And so it is more similar to Nash in that sense. in that sense. So it's more an equilibrium. Whereas the Stackelberg was not an equilibrium, it was more than an equilibrium. Whatever it was, we just call it a Stackelberg solution. Okay. So now in our model, pi m is JL, leader, in the period 1 and the axis C1. Like we start with the period 1. So that remember our notation? This is CY. So beginning with C1. Period 1 and the initial state is C1. So pi m is going to be that, pi r is going to be that. And so we have now a definition of Stackelberg equilibrium for the production problem that I'm solving. Okay. So we already have the centralized solution. We're now going to have a decentralized solution. The decentralized solution is a backward induction, and it can be done just like we do the dynamic programming. But the difference is that now we can show that this is a step away, which was not known before in some way. It's not my contribution. It's known in the control theory before me, but I'm just articulating it. How do you implement this in your solution? Remember when I said you make the first period decision, somehow you anticipate what is going to happen in the second year. Well, how do you do that? That's how you do it. Let me show you how you do it. So the manufacturer observes C1, which is known to everybody and is fixed right now. And he decides W1 and C1 based on this formula. Because we have already computed these formulas. We've already done the solution. Now the question is how we are going to implement this solution. So you do this, and then given that W1 and that Q1, the ordered quantity will be a function of C1, W1, and Q1. It'll be P1 will be a function of C1, W1, Q1. So the retailer will look at the table. He has a table of this guy. And he already knows C1. And he said, okay, you gave me $3, I put $3 here. And you produced 20 units, I put 20 units here. Notice now, I am not putting that function here. I'm putting the result of the function. Because if I put the function here, then that becomes a function of a function. And that becomes a calculus of variation and power. It's more complicated. It's not that. You cannot do a function of function because then it will become functional and you have a whole more difficult one. So this is same as so these are ordinary functions, nothing to do with the function of function. Then one period takes place. C2 gets realized as C2, small C2. And then manufacturer observes C2 and observes C2, which is observing inventory in the news pointer problem, because that was the state of the news pointer problem. Here, the inventory is going to be 0. I'm sorry, inventory will be either 0 when the sales are lost, or it will be whatever the inventory will be. Initially, it's deterministic quantity. So we have, so the manufacturer has a table, he looks at C2 and he designs W2. Once W2 Q2 is decided, this guy has his own table. He plugs in W2 Q2 here, W2 Q2 here, he also observes C2 and he decides. So that's how they have to implement this, which means that the foresight of what would happen in period 2 is implicit in this table. That table has to be followed by them when they make decisions. Because they already derived those functions. They haven't decided this. They only derived that function. They haven't decided what the quantity would be until period 2. But in period 2, these guys will decide these guys based on the new information about demand, about the cost or demand in the newsletter setting, and then they use the table to. Any question here? Because the next will be I'm going to coordinate. this is a double marginalization. We can show that the profit here is not the same as the profit of the centralized problem. That's easy to show. And then we will show a coordinating contract for two-period problem. Okay. Any question here? Is this being recorded? Some recording was going on, so it's good that it's being recorded. I hope to get the copy. Okay. So we're going to develop a revenue sharing contract, which is well known in our field. So I'm going to have phi 1 and phi 2. And so once you have revenue sharing, you can do the other contracts, buyback, and all these just like similarly, but I don't want to do this. I'm just going to do revenue sharing. So I have a contract here. In contract, what do I define? I define the wholesale price and the share the retailer gets, okay? And the wholesale price in period 2 and the share the retailer gets in period 2, where the share is between 0 and 1. And I want to find out. Okay, so this is the contract. And now I find out what is it. So in the contract, what changes is the objective function of these two guys. They're different now because they have phi in there. So what is the objective function of the retailer? It is the portion of the revenue that he gets, right? Phi 1 is the portion of the total revenue he gets. Then he subtracts his cost. He paid W1 to the guy, the manufacturer. And then he has a portion of the second period revenue he gets, and he subtracts the cost. So that is his profit. And the state variable is the same. We show that for any phi 1, phi 2, the manufacturer sets this W1, that W2, then this is a coordinating contract. I want to show you notice two things here. That one is exactly the same contract as a single period. You go to the Nussbaum formula. This is not Nussbaum problem. You go there. The second period is a single period problem. So everything that we have learned in single period problem has to go through the single period, right? The second period is single period. So that is the contract in all our single period supply chain coordination. But that one was never known before this paper. That is a different contract. I'm not showing all the things that will happen because we don't know that. I'm just showing that I can coordinate. So now notice there's another thing that I'm writing a paper on what is called 5 steps to supply chain coordination. It's not the reason I'm not publishing it is because my former student is taking forever to finish it. I never. It's a problem, probably 7 or 8 years old now, but it is eventually happening. It's going to happen eventually. And there I show that in our field itself, when we do supply chain coordination, we simply equate the response function to the centralized decision, and we solve for the parameters for the contract. But one step is missing. That doesn't guarantee that what you got is a coordinate, is an equilibrium. Because equilibrium for the new problem has a different objective functions. So you need to define the equilibrium for these objectives. So you have to plug those guys into this to show that it's equal. And it is, but it has to be shown. Unless you prove it, that step always gives you equilibrium. So this is the paper that we are writing. Okay, so that problem is finished. There are any questions? I will deal with those right now and answer. And I will then go to the mix, only briefly as to what it is. Question?
So we're going to see the inventory one because without the inventory, it looks like
well, the inventory in this case, what happens is that, no, good that you asked the question. When you do the inventory, you will have two state variables, C and I. So all those functions will become function of C and I. And the only thing I say in the paper is that this is the first time that we have a contract in which there are two states. Because all our supply chain coordinates are single state. So I actually not only have two periods, but I even have two states. So I say that, but it is mathematically, you go through this formula and you get this table. The table now will have I2 as well, because we are going to put I2 in there, so that's the paper has all of it, so I don't want to. So, if there are no questions, if there's still time, how much time do you have?
Yes, stop in time. We have until 12, but.
Okay, good. So,
Into time.
so then I have a little bit of time to get you. So, working on this, I'm going to tell you why I came up with these mixed leadership games, and then I'll tell you how it relates to the literature. So I come from, as I mentioned to you, I come from a small village, and we have a system like this. Prakash made it. Prakash is more advanced city guy. Anyway, but here's what happens in my home. The father brings the money and gives the mother the budget for that service line. So he's the leader. He said, "This is the budget." Mother decides what to do with this budget. You know, what we buy, grocery, this. On the other hand, now there's a leader here. On the other hand, my sisters, and I grew up with several sisters, when they become 16 or 15 or 16, whatever the age was in those days, my mother says, "Father, let's find a husband for this girl." The mother is making a call, and the father then goes and look at various boys and whatever the procedure is, and eventually there is an arranged marriage of some sort. I've gone through some of those with my sisters. So there's a different leader, a different decision maker. So why not leader follower here as well? So I created a mixed leadership game, and initially we published a paper in open loop in a continuous time setting, and it was an advertising game. And later on, and one of my co-author on that first paper is Tamer Basar. He's one of the game theorists. He has a book, Basar Ulster book, which is well known, and he's celebrating 70th birthday. I mean, everybody that I know right now, there are 5 people who are celebrating their birthdays. And I give you, somehow I don't know why it all end up in 0. Siddhar Chayur is becoming 60. So he's celebrating his birthday somewhere in Oslo. And Tamer Basar is 75. So there's a special issue, and I have to contribute to the special issue. And David Simchi Levy is becoming 70. I don't know where he's celebrating. And I'm becoming 80, so my conferences are in 2 or 3 different places. One is in Texas, one is in one is in Athens. And then George Lightman, who is my good friend, is becoming 100. Why not 93, 97, David Simchi Levy, 71, not 70? Everybody's 0 in this group. Everybody's becoming 60, 70, and 75. 75, maybe 70, 75. I do not know Basar's. I think it's 75. Okay, so Basar is one of my fathers. So let me go through this. So we have a decision where people are making decisions about advertising. And I'm going to go fast on this. There is something called a cooperative advertising. And the idea is the following. the retailer advertises because he knows the market. But usually retailer will not advertise sufficient amount so that he's not going to sell the sufficient amount, which will hurt the manufacturing producer. So what does the manufacturer do? He said to the retailer, okay, I will give you 10% of your advertising expenditure, or 5%, or 20%, or whatever. Then that increases the advertising expenses of the retailer. And retailer then advertises more and sells more, so the manufacturer benefits. So the question now is, how do you solve for this cooperative advertising percentage? There has to be an optimal decision somewhere. That problem is well known. And what I've done is to solve that problem in a continuous time setting of a model that I developed in 1983, which is now called SETI model. It has a Wikipedia presence. It's got maybe 50, 60 papers that have been followed that paper, and it's because of the tractability of that model. So I don't want to get into detail on that. In fact, that is the paper I'm presenting that about SETI model. So that's being used in this. So there's a whole lot of literature. There's a huge amount of money being spent. For example, in estimated 2007 was 25 billion on cooperative advertising. I don't have the details of what now it is. There are marketing literature where they say that industrial product, the manufacturers subsidize the edge as 69%. And in consumer convenience product, the retailer gets subsidized 80%, 88% as much as 88%. So that's all marketing literature and stuff. So there's a cooperative advertising. And as you can see, IBM does 50%, Apple 75%, Nature Bounty 50%. The question is, what should that be? Nobody looked at this problem. This is empirical literature in marketing. So I looked at this problem and I published one paper, the first paper in 2009. But later I published 4 papers in this study. So these are some of the papers. By the way, the feedback Stackelberg structure first was put forward by Papa Vasilopoulos and then Simon. I sent the paper when we wrote this paper, because their paper was inscrutable. You know, no, I believe nobody read that paper other than those 2 guys. And it basically disappeared. Then we had a doctoral student who was a math PhD, and we put him to read this paper from line by line. And then we wrote another paper. And finally, when we sent the paper to this Papa Sivolas guy, he said, finally, you know, I'm happy that that you guys have articulated my paper. So that's the beginning of a Stackelberg equilibrium. And then we generalize that to continuous time, which was not there. All of this is esoteric stuff. So I will just go straight to the problem. So this is then the mixed equilibrium. So what am I going to do here? The manufacturer decides. So what I said is, why not retailers subsidize also the manufacturer's advertising? Remember, industry dairy decided after got milk. Remember, General Motors had an advertisement called General Motors Mark of Excellence. These are the manufacturer's advertisement. Maybe retailer also benefits from there. So maybe retailer gets some larger sale because of that, then he can also advertise, subsidize. And we develop this model where we say, okay, let manufacturers subsidize this retailer at this percentage, and let the retailer subsidize that manufacturer at this percentage. After they decide these percentages, then retailer comes up with this amount of advertising, and the manufacturer comes with this amount of advertising. You can see now the manufacturer is the leader, and the retailer is the leader at this level. Then they are both follower at this level. So this becomes a Stackelberg game, this becomes a Nash game, this becomes a Nash game. So this is a Nash Stackelberg game that allows you to solve this problem. Okay. So we wrote this paper and sent it to marketing science. And they say, give us an example where the retailer is subsidized. Well, we don't know any example. So we're telling them, what if we can show you that if the retailer is not allowed to subsidize, then the total profit of the supply chain will be less. But if the retailer is going to allow to subsidize, then he will subsidize more than zero in some cases. So why not the practice follow what we do? But no, the journals want a paper. So we submit this, we publish this paper in Science Journal, which is the top journal in control theory. But we did not get marketing science. Okay? And the market share is XT. So I'm just going to give, so this is all, there's a mixed leadership. Okay? And we actually solved the problem. The definition is complete. So you know that the mixed leadership. Now, why it is related to the literature is like this. This M is the same as this guy, this R is the same as this guy. They don't have to be. There could be 2 manufacturers and 2 retailers, 4 people. And that's just a vector generalization of a Stackelberg game. And that exists in the literature. But somehow this is then a special case. But the special case has to be given a new name because this is, and then it also makes sure that these 2 I got the same. So there is some specialization. Okay, so that's the problem. This is the SETI model here. You can see that market share, it changes according to the advertising of the 2 guys. And they work on the people who don't buy your product. This is the depreciation rate of the market share. And this is the stochastic term, which is Brownian motion and Wheeler process. This is, so when I generalize when I extended an existing marketing model, I generalized in 2 ways. I generalized because they had only 1 minus x, not square root. 1 minus x. If I put 1 minus x in a Brownian motion, it's a stochastic differential equation, I cannot solve the problem. So what I did is I tweaked the problem and I changed it to square root of 1 minus x. And then I can solve it. I can solve the problem equals 4. So that became the same model. It's got 2 extensions. One is change 1 minus x to square root 1 minus x and give you a term which is a random term. And Deepak Jain, who was a dean of Northwestern one time, was a student of Frank Bass. They have a paper which actually looks at my model and shows that my model is at least as good as the model that I extended, if not better. So at least some justification is there for this. So now they've been turned into games and Nash games and Stackelberg games and multiple this and that. So there are a lot of, there's recently the paper just came in operations research where I generalized this model further, but I made this 1 minus x to be 1 minus x to the beta, keeping the tractability. So there's the highest generalization of the model, still keeping the tractability. Is that what I'm going to present at Carnegie Mellon tomorrow? Okay, so there's a V advertising and there's a percentage that I'm giving. So you can see that guy is going to spend that much money, but minus that because some of that is coming from the other guy. So you're going to get the objective function via a percentage and that. So that is the problem, and we can solve that problem. And there's the way that was with the So I'm just going to. It's not this is the heavy duty control theory. Not that I'm doing anything mathematical here, but what happens is that notice you solve the Stackelberg game period-wise. So in continuous time, you solve the Stackelberg game at each instant. Right. So that is where the Hamiltonian comes in. So what you do is you solve the game at each instant. And the coordination is done, not coordination, but the coordination of mathematics is done by the shadow prices. Okay. So those are the prices that you will determine. So that's kind of what's going on. And in this problem, this is An instantaneous game is the game of Stackelberg game that we all know. Because it is the single period game at each instant. So you're solving the game every instant. And then eventually you find the solution for that, globally the solution. And so I keep going through this, solve them and case that. And there's a verification theorem, which is the word given to the following idea, that if you solve a dynamic programming problem, you have a solution. And there are many solutions for dynamic programming problem in many cases. So you have to find out which is the right solution. And there are many people, including Nobel laureates, have made mistakes. Because they just solve the problem without realizing or proving that as a verification theorem. So what is verification theorem is that here's the dynamic programming solution, but the solution must satisfy certain conditions. And in infinite horizon problem, it's called growth condition at infinity. In finite horizon, it is the condition at t, big T, which is a finite horizon. The value function has to satisfy those conditions. And then they prove that this is an optimal. That's kind of the idea here. So we prove the verification theorem because the value function here is a linear value function in state. And we guess the linear function. And we can solve the whole problem with the guess. And then verification theorem says that that is an equilibrium. But in dynamic programming setting, when you do the verification theorem, that is an optimal solution, and it's unique. But when you have a game theory, you have verification theorem, it only tells you it's an equilibrium. It doesn't tell you there's another or not. There may be more than one. So in the setting model, we never know right now, although I feel that there is no other equilibrium, but there's no way I can prove it. So all we can say is we got an equilibrium, we have a solution of these two guys, and we tell you how much the participation rate would be, how much the advertising would be, all of that we can do, but we only can tell you it's in any. So this is what happens. We find equilibrium. I just want to go through some last slide that I give you before concluding the talk. You can see here that's manufactured, and that's percentage wise, whatever. So this is the U. Okay, so what happens here is, as you can see, there's a profit margin of the manufacturer. It turns out that if the manufacturer has a high profit margin, then he will subsidize. But if the retailer has a high profit margin, manufacturer doesn't need to subsidize him because retailer will maximize on his own accord. Okay, so you can start to see here that as the margin changes, the which is the manufacturer subsidy, as the margin increases, for low margin, where the other guy has a high margin, and the other guy has a low margin, his subsidy rate is 0. And at some point, his subsidy rate is increasing as his margin goes up. On the other hand, that's the retailer's margin. You can see retailer margin, if the manufacturer margin is low, at least retailer margin is high, the retailer will advertise, but as his margin becomes, this is the retailer subsidy. Okay, so the idea basically is that if the margin of a particular player is high, then other guys don't have to subsidize. So this is one of the results that we have. We have others, but I just don't want to talk about that right now. So I'm going to conclude the talk. We have a difference between Nash and Stackelberg games, and we give you a type of Stackelberg equilibrium and two-period supply chains. We define a multi-period feedback Stackelberg equilibrium. We have a problem of dynamic pricing production in a supply chain with cost learning. We develop a revenue sharing contract that coordinates the two-period supply chain. And we have a mixed leadership game of cooperative advertising, which is a control theory problem here. And then we have references, some references. These are not the list of everything. It is, I have not updated this list for some time, so I just give you some. So I thank you for listening. Any questions?
I have a very quick one. In the beginning, you talk about the commitment to the price. So the first price, first stage and second period are the same. So I think, in reality, the price can change, but maybe just within certain percentage range, right? So, you say that the people are going to get sued because of those change price and so on. So in the model, it's in the possibility, after you derive in the numerical study, is it possible that they are actually within certain range and, they can sign a contract that, yeah, we are going to
Okay,
possibly adjust the price?
so I have a couple of comments there. First of all, you are now putting the constraint on the second biggest price. Okay?
Yeah.
So you're saying that the problem is the model doesn't do that. If you do an open loop, it will give you the second biggest price. But after that, you are requiring him not to change the price beyond a certain point. How do you formulate that in the problem to begin with? It's not clear, right? Because you have to put some constraints, but those constraints are not being put. The open loop problem, you don't need the constraint, or you're putting the constraint after everything happens, the problem is solved. Then you're saying, I will now impose the constraint on you. So that's number one. So as soon as you put the constraint, how you solve the problem. B, how do you know that these constraints are not going to give you $1 million versus the court, which only can give you 500,000? So there is no a priori idea that that constraint that you put, the bound you put, will actually be consistent with the court's highest penalty that court wants you to pay. But that's just getting into again, the idea is how to solve the formulate problem, solve it. What you're saying, empirically, you can go to this thing and see what's happening, but one has to figure out how to solve it. But nobody has solved this problem. Have you seen a model in which they, in the commitment model, the people actually have a court highest penalty, the court charges, and then solve the problem? No, nobody has done that. I mean, all they're saying is it's a gentleman's agreement, it's a pre-commitment, this and that, and let's go on. You have to find a model, first of all. See, there's also an infinite regress that goes on. So it's very difficult. So for example, what happens is, if the retailer knew that the manufacturer will change the price under certain conditions, if that is the state that's going to come, because it's going to be the reaction of the state, whatever the state is observed. So then I can say, okay, in period one, if your state is this, you're going to change the price. If your state is this, you're not going to change the price. So I'm going to take that into account. But then I solve the problem, taking that into account, but then it's an infinite regress again, right? So it goes back and forth, and there's no conclusion of whether it will converge. So that's kind of conceptually, it is not an easy thing. I mean, I mean, there are some papers in Makers of Design where Tirol has a paper where, he talks about several equilibria where some equilibria there is no truth. I mean, people lie. So there's a lie in there, right? So that problem, economics people have not solved it. And our field usually follow the economics people. When they solve it, we apply those models. That's unfortunate part, but that's how we do.
Very good question. So can you give some intuition as to why, as the margin is increasing, the participation rate comes down linearly?
Oh, this is just the model. It doesn't have to come down linearly. No.
Can it go up as the margin keeps going up? Can it?
No, if the margin goes up, if my margin go up,
There's no.
then
need.
and your margin is not high, so you're not going to advertise too much because your margin not too high. The retailer doesn't get so much. So I have to give you some.
Yeah, sure.
And if your margin is already high, so why should I bother? Because you're going to.
Because then the retailer, let's say the retailer's margin is going up, they have a greater incentive to sell more, and you want to increase your sales. So is there any?
Well, it's a question of when you stop it. This is a simple model and we get a simple result. But in general, it will be possible to figure out that as the retailer margin goes up, I can still give you more money, so you will spend more. It's possible. It depends on the parameters of the
yeah.
problem. But it makes intuitive sense, at least in some circumstances, that I don't need to subsidize if you have your own interest in maximizing your sale.
Sure, yeah.
So
That's
that's
the-
kind of the idea that came out of this simple model, and I think it's intuitively clear to marketing folks as well, so.
Well, thank you very much. It's very interesting and stimulated, it's a very good expression of the traditional idea. Thank you very much.
When you finish this, they said recording is on, right? So there's something recording going on.
So.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the jacket is in my room. So do you want
Yes.
to pick it up now?
Yeah, I will pick it up now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might need it, and then I will not forget it. Also. So I'm gonna go to lunch with some people, right? Are you going to?
Oh, I have to, hold on a second, let me stop the code.
Yeah.
So I have to.
Oh, pause, start recording.
You guys use Zoom?